Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're venturing into the really intriguing story of the Denisovans.
Right, these ancient humans who, for a long time, were kind of a mystery, more like a genetic echo than actual fossils.
Exactly, and our exploration really kicks off with just a tiny piece of finger bone found in a Siberian cave back in 2008.
Yeah, and from that tiny bone, the story just spirals outwards across Asia. It reveals this, well, surprisingly complex chapter in our own evolution.
It's amazing, and what makes the Denisovan story so compelling, I think, is that for years they were basically a ghost population.
Known almost entirely from DNA analysis, right? Not from a pile of bones like, say, Neanderthals initially.
Precisely. So today we're diving into the latest research, looking at recent articles detailing these ongoing discoveries.
And the fossil finds that are finally starting to give us a clearer picture of who these Denisovans actually were.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive, if you like, is to understand who they were, where they lived.
And crucially, how they connect to us, to modern humans. We want to cut through some of the scientific complexity.
Pull out the really fascinating stuff for you. And just to start us off, think about this.
Oh yeah, this is a good one.
People living today in places like New Guinea and Bougainville, incredibly far from Siberia.
Right, thousands of miles away.
They carry a significant amount, something like 4 to 6% of Denisovan DNA.
It's kind of mind-boggling when you think about that distance and that connection. How did that happen?
Exactly. So let's unpack this, starting right back at that cave.
Okay, so 2008, Denisova Cave. It's in the Altai Mountains, southern Siberia.
And this, well, seemingly tiny finger bone fragment turns up.
Yeah, but it turned out to hold this incredibly well-preserved DNA. Researchers like Johannes Kraus, they managed to extract it.
Which is amazing in itself for something potentially so old. And they first sequenced the mitochondrial DNA, right?
That's the mtDNA. It traces the maternal line. It's a smaller piece of the puzzle, but easier to get sometimes.
And the results?
Well, they were a shock. It just didn't match modern human mtDNA.
Okay.
And it didn't match Neanderthal mtDNA either, even though we knew Neanderthals were in that region.
So straight away, this tiny bone is yelling, hey, there's someone else here.
Pretty much a completely unknown player in the human story.
And the announcement in 2010 really shook things up in paleoanthropology.
Oh, absolutely. Because, before this, we mostly identified hominins from fossils, from their physical shape.
But here, as Chris Stringer famously put it, the Denisovans were essentially created from DNA work.
Yeah, it was a real paradigm shift, wasn't it? Showing the power of ancient genetics.
Definitely. And then they managed to get the nuclear DNA, the full genome.
Yes, the nuclear genome, which is much more comprehensive, and that's where it got even more interesting.
Okay.
It showed the Denisovans were a sister group to the Neanderthals,
Meaning
meaning Denisovans and Neanderthals shared a common ancestor more recently with each other than either of them did with us, with Homo sapiens.
Right, so they branched off together, and then our line branched off earlier.
Basically, yes. And then there was also that tooth found in the cave.
Ah, yes, the molar. It was huge, wasn't it?
Unusually large, yeah. And its mitochondrial DNA also marked it as Denisovan. Looked quite different from our teeth or Neanderthal teeth.
So already we have a distinct genetic profile and some unusual physical hints.
Exactly. And then came that bombshell about the DNA in modern populations in New Guinea and Bougainville.
That initial finding, it just blew the doors open, didn't it?
Completely. It immediately told us Denisovans weren't just hanging out in one Siberian cave.
They must have been spread across a much, much wider area of Asia.
And, maybe more importantly, it meant they must have met and interbred with the ancestors of modern humans moving through Asia.
So they're not just some extinct side branch. They're actually part of our genetic story.
Precisely. And that finding really lit a fire under researchers.
The where are the fossils question.
Exactly. If the genes are showing up way over in the Pacific, surely there must be physical remains somewhere between there and Siberia.
Maybe overlooked in museum drawers or still buried somewhere.
So the hunt was on, a new phase of searching for the actual bones and teeth of these Denisovans.
And that search, well, it's definitely ongoing, but it has started yielding some really fascinating clues.
Yeah, we now have a handful of fossils from different parts of Asia that are being linked to Denisovans, though with, varying levels of confidence.
Okay, so where should we start this fossil tour? Maybe the Tibetan Plateau. Quite a different spot from Siberia.
Good place to start. The Baishia Karst Cave jawbone. Quite a story behind that one.
Discovered way back in 1980, wasn't it? By a Buddhist monk.
That's the one. And it kind of sat around for decades before researchers like Fa Hu Chen really got a chance to study it properly.
And the key was new technology, right? Not
Yeah.
DNA this time.
Right. In 2019, they used protein analysis, looking at the protein building blocks when DNA is too degraded. It confirmed the jawbone was Denisovan, a huge deal. First physical proof outside Denisova Cave.
Wow. And the dating.
At least 160,000 years old, based on the sediments it was found with. So they were on the high plateau, a really challenging environment a long time ago.
Showing they were adaptable. And there's more from that cave, isn't there? They found DNA later.
Yes, actual Denisovan DNA in the cave sediments. Not just from one time, but showing they were there around 100,000 years ago. Again, around 60,000 years ago.
And maybe even as recently as 45,000 years ago. So long-term presence.
It seems so. And then there's that incredible connection to modern Tibetans.
The high-altitude adaptation gene from 2014.
Yeah, a study showed that a specific gene variant that helps Tibetans cope with low oxygen levels seems to have been inherited from Denisovans.
That's just amazing. A direct functional legacy from this ancient group.
It really is. Okay, so shifting eastwards now over to China.
Let's talk about the Harbin skull. The Dragon Man. That one made headlines.
Definitely. Found back in the 1930s, then hidden in a well for decades.
Quite the backstory. And only donated to a museum recently in 2018.
And when Shiju Ni, Chris Stringer, and others described it in 2021, it caused a stir.
Because it's huge, right? Big brain size like us, but shaped differently.
Exactly. Dated to at least 146,000 years ago, they classified it as a new species, Homo longi.
Dragon Man. But where's the Denisovan link?
Well, some features, especially the really large molar teeth, looked a bit like the Denisovan teeth from the cave in Tibet.
Ah, so sparking speculation.
Mhm.
Is Homo longi maybe what Denisovans look like, at least in that region? Or a close cousin?
That's the big question people started asking. Still debated, of course.
Okay, another piece of the puzzle. What about Laos? There was a tooth found there.
Right. Tamgu Hollow Cave, a single molar found in 2018.
And protein analysis again?
Confirmed it was Homo, so definitely human family, but couldn't pin down the species.
So it's shape.
Its shape, particularly compared to the Beishia karst molars, led the researchers to tentatively say, this looks Denisovan.
So another potential dot on the map, way down in Southeast Asia. Even a single tooth adds something.
It does. Then you've got the Zhujiao site, also in China, northeast China.
These were found much earlier, in the 70s. Skull fragments.
Yes, and their classification has always been a bit contentious, hard to place.
But then someone noticed a dental connection.
Christopher Bay pointed out that one of the Zhujiao molars looks remarkably similar to one from Denisova Cave itself.
Interesting. So maybe these long puzzling fossils are actually Denisovan too.
It's another strong possibility being considered. Adds another potential data point in China.
And wasn't there something found off the coast of Taiwan? Dredged up from the sea?
The Penghu jawbone, yeah.
Yeah.
Found by fishermen in 2008, donated to a museum.
And initially described with hints of Denisovan-like teeth.
Right, a large second molar was noted back in 2015, but more recently, just this past April.
More protein analysis.
Yes, indicated it belonged to a male Denisovan. The dating is broad, between 10,000 and 190,000 years ago, but
it puts Denisovans firmly in that region too. Siberia, Tibet, China, Laos, Taiwan. They really got around.
they certainly seem to have covered a vast area of Asia, which makes sense given the genetic evidence in modern populations.
So, okay, we have these scattered fossil clues popping up all over. The challenge now is making sense of it all, right? How do they relate?
Exactly. How do we classify all these finds and the growing number of other enigmatic Homo fossils from East Asia? It's getting complicated.
Which leads us to this tangled family tree discussion. There was a recent preprint, Stringer and colleagues.
Yes, 2025. They looked at dozens of fossils and proposed a tree where Eurasian hominins sort of cluster into three main groups.
Modern humans, Neanderthals,
And this Homo longi group. And crucially, in their analysis, H. longi didn't just include the Harbin skull.
it included the original Denisova remains too.
Mm-hmm.
And Baixia, Zhujiao, Penghu.
All of them, plus some other Chinese fossils. So Stringer's view is leaning towards longi potentially being the species name for the whole Denisovan group.
Wow, okay. But that's not the only idea on the table.
Not at all. You have researchers like Christopher Bay and Zhuji Wu arguing in papers from late 2024 that the Harbin skull is actually distinct enough.
That it doesn't fit neatly with the Denisova cave specimens.
Right. They think Harbin is separate. And they propose a different new species name, Homo juluensis, based on the Zhujiao remains.
And that group, H. juluensis, they see as including Denisova Cave, Bishia, and Penghu.
That's their interpretation. So, you see, there's active debate on how these pieces fit and what names to use.
It really highlights how tricky it is with limited fossils. And Sheila Threya raised a caution flag about this, didn't she?
She did, basically warning against jumping to conclusions and assigning species names too quickly.
Because we don't have DNA from Arbin or Zujiao.
And we don't have many physical bits for the ones identified by DNA, so correlating genes and physical form is still really hard.
You could end up being totally wrong, as she put it.
Exactly. She even floated the idea last year that maybe Denisovans aren't a separate species in that sense, but perhaps a branch of Asian Homo erectus.
Whoa. So we might find Denisovan DNA in fossils we currently call H. erectus.
It's a provocative thought. It would certainly shake things up.
It really underscores the need for more data, doesn't it? Especially data that bridges the gap between genes and bones.
Absolutely. We need more fossils with preserved DNA, or at least proteins. Stringer mentioned more proteomic data might be coming from China soon.
That could be crucial. Ancient DNA is the gold standard, but preservation is tough in warmer climates.
Very tough. So yeah, Athrea's point about potentially linking to H. erectus just shows how much we still don't know for sure.
Okay, so putting the naming debates aside for a moment, the bigger picture is that the Denisovans have just revolutionized how we see human evolution.
Undeniably. Like Katerina Duca said, it's the first time we've had a human group defined mainly by its genome, not its fossils.
And it's really shifted the focus towards Asia, hasn't it? From being seen as a sort of evolutionary backwater
to being recognized as a hotspot of human evolution, much more dynamic than previously thought.
And discovering Denisovans is making us rethink the origins of our own species, Homo sapiens, too.
It is. The genetics point to a common ancestor for us, Neanderthals and Denisovans living, many hundreds of thousands of years ago.
And the standard model puts that ancestor in Africa.
That's the prevailing theory. But now, researchers like Bay and Stringer are saying, hang on, maybe we need to consider Europe or Asia, too,
as the potential homeland for this common ancestor.
It's being seriously considered. Stringer even outlined a scenario where maybe the lineage leading to us, sapiens, actually migrated back into Africa,
while the Neanderthal and Denisovan lines spread out across Eurasia.
Exactly. It complicates the simple out-of-Africa story, or at least adds significant twists to it.
And Bay suggests maybe even multiple centers of origin, across Africa and Eurasia.
He keeps that possibility open. While acknowledging the strong African evidence, he thinks we shouldn't discount major developments in Eurasia.
But it's clear there's a lot of uncertainty here. Stringer himself admits we don't know where or even what this common ancestor looked like yet.
It's a period with huge question marks still hanging over it.
But one theme that keeps coming up strongly, especially with Denisovans, is migration and mixing.
Yes, Katerina Duca emphasizes this. It seems to be fundamental to the human story. And the prime example from Denisova Cave.
Denny, the hybrid girl.
Denny, yeah. Discovered in 2018, a first-generation hybrid.
Meaning one parent was Neanderthal, the other was Denisovan.
Directly. Neanderthal mother, Denisovan father. An absolutely incredible find.
Because finding a first-generation hybrid is like finding a needle in a haystack, right?
Yeah.
It suggests
this probably wasn't a super rare event. If we found one in the limited remains we have, interbreeding was likely reasonably common when these groups met.
So the Denisovans, as Duca puts it, are kind of an early signpost for potentially extensive population mixing throughout our past.
All stemming from that tiny finger bone. It's quite a journey.
So wrapping this up then, the Denisovans started as, like, genetic ghosts.
Known only from DNA, yeah. But now, slowly, through these fossil finds, they're emerging as this really widespread, adaptable group.
A group that didn't just live alongside our ancestors, but actually interbred with them, leaving traces in our DNA today.
And these ongoing discoveries are constantly challenging our neat little boxes of human evolution, forcing us to redraw the family tree.
And the whole debate about names, Longi versus Juliensis versus maybe even Erectus, shows it's a really active, evolving field.
Absolutely. Science in progress.
And maybe the final thought to leave everyone with is thinking about how the Denisovans were basically invisible in the fossil record for so long.
Right. Hidden until genetic technology unlocked their existence.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other chapters of the human story might still be hidden?
What other ancient relatives or complex interactions are waiting to be discovered, maybe through new fossils or maybe through even more advanced genetic techniques somewhere across the globe?
It really does give you a sense of how much more there might be to learn about our incredibly complex origins.
Definitely a lot to ponder.